Vice President of Product Management from SailPoint, and Lori Robinson, Vice President of Product Management from SailPoint.
Good morning, everyone. So Ben, do you like a good documentary?
No. No, I do. I like the guy. What's the guy's name that eats the snakes?
I wouldn't know that
I like
one.
that guy.
You like
I
that
watch him
guy?
a lot.
Is it like Bear?
Bear Grylls? Yeah, that guy. I watch that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, recently I was watching a Netflix documentary called Stolen Heist of the Century.
It's a good one, seriously.
It's a good one.
Amazing.
And it had me thinking. There were a lot of similarities between what happens in the physical security world and in the digital world. So the premise of this documentary was that the Antwerp Diamond Center in Belgium is known for its security. And everyone thought it was the most secure place in the world. They considered it impenetrable until it wasn't. So, like any good security system, they had a vault that was protected by, they were protected by layers and layers of security. They had a vault, they had a gate, they had all these different things. But somehow, the thieves got away with $100 million in diamonds. So how? How did they do this? While the vault had multiple layers of controls, the thieves exploited the gaps between systems. They knew that there were no centralized controls. They knew that there was no anomaly detection, and that the controls, if one went down, the other one didn't know about it. There was also no human oversight. So recognizing this, the thieves went in and they took the controls down one by one. Unfortunately, this is exactly what we are seeing in enterprises when cybersecurity teams and identity teams are not working together. We're seeing that there's cracks in the seam. In a technology landscape dominated by cloud and mobile and AI technologies, identity is the control, and we heard Doug talk about that in his session. And as the control, it's also the very thing that is getting attacked. According to a CrowdStrike report, identity-based attacks account for 75% of initial access attempts in the enterprise breaches. So despite the prevalence of identity-based controls and systems, teams often sit on the periphery of security. So while many organizations have implemented standalone identity and security controls, the environments are completely fragmented. There's no single pane of glass that demonstrates who has access to what across the enterprise. Without this level of visibility, it is difficult to identify risks and control gaps, and even more difficult for people to respond. Consequently, attackers are finding those cracks in the seams. And just like Antwerp, what looks unbreakable on paper becomes vulnerable in practice. SailPoint is on a mission to change this. Today, Ben and I are going to introduce some technologies, actually, that Chandra and everyone's been talking about over the last couple of days. But these innovations really shape how identity and security are coming together to power what we're calling adaptive identity. So Ben, one of those technologies is observability and insights. Why don't you start there?
Absolutely. So SailPoint Observability and Insights, or O&I as I abbreviate it, or we abbreviate it, it's powered by this identity graph capability that we talked about at Navigate. We kind of pre-launched that last year for those that may remember. And O&I brings together the power of identity, data, and the security context together in this centralized view. And it's going to provide this dynamic, interactive map that helps your administrators observe how and why and when access was granted by revealing this full access picture. And it's for any identity, and it helps you navigate all these nested entitlements. We had customers that had entitlements that were nested like 250 layers deep. Duplicate access paths, that y'all know it's so hard sometimes to be able to remove that access, and perhaps most importantly, the privilege piece, and that's a drumbeat that Lori's leading the charge on. Like this is, it is all about privilege and everyday privilege. So the power of the graph is really in providing this insight into the relationships across the objects, and that includes like everything, like the human to machine identities, the privileged access, the structured, the unstructured data, the access permissions that span on-premises, cloud, multi-cloud, SaaS apps, and the big thing is it can bring in external security events. I've been asked about that a lot, and so anyway, super cool. But like on its own, like visibility, the old phrase is it's necessary but not sufficient. I think something like that is not enough. So look, y'all need to be able to protect and proactively detect and mitigate risk in your environment. And SailPoint O&I addresses this challenge by delivering these actionable insights. And they surface changes or anomalies in your security posture, and just as importantly, provide you with recommendations for how to adjust that posture to mitigate the risk. So where you've got overprivileged or out of policy access, orphaned accounts, anomalous user behaviors, unused access, entitlements with multiple access pathways like I spoke about a moment ago, gaps in control coverage, all that stuff. And so with O&I, your teams can identify that risk and prioritize the cleanup and improve the access model over time. So like I said, O&I powering that is an identity graph that we pre-announced last year. I've got a job because I managed to get it out, so it's here, it's live.
Way to go, way to go.
That's one thing, you cannot go to 2 of these and not have delivered the thing that you delivered the previous year and still have the job. So, but look, O&I is a source of data and insights, and again, you can pull in data from all these external systems. And the thing is, you can surface this stuff in so many different areas. It may be in an access request or a certification process, or Harbor Pilot might call the graph in response to a question it gets, a prompt it gets, like, show me all of Lori's privileged access. So look, it's a great proactive defense mechanism that's always evaluating your identity security posture and providing those insights, adjusting those controls. Again, it's all before weaknesses are exploited, but that's great, but like, the dude that came last year talked about always assuming breach. Anyway, Kevin Mandian, like Kevin says, assume breach. And so you're going to get breached. And so that's great, but what happens when there is an active threat? And Lori, why don't you talk about that and how we're helping customers detect and respond to those threats when they do happen?
Yeah, it's such a great point, Ben, because O&I is that proactive mechanism. But we also want to be able to respond quickly if necessary. So I know as security professionals, contain, right? So SailPoint is excited to announce this week support for the shared signaling framework. We call it SSF for short, so you'll hear us say SSF a lot. But it is the shared signaling framework. It's an open standard that allows identity and security systems to share security and risk signals across the environment. And this is so important because we're not just siloed, we're part of an ecosystem. So unified identity security is faster response. It is faster containment at the end of the day. When access is centrally modeled and combined with real-time security alerts, identity teams can orchestrate remediation activity much more quickly. Imagine a scenario where you have a hostile termination. Not only can you immediately deprovision access, but you can also send signals using SSF to, say, an endpoint device management system to wipe the device, or more importantly, and so many of us know this in RIF and hostile termination situations, kill all of the sessions, notify an IDP, or notify Google to say, shut down all of their open browser sessions. This is the power of security and identity systems working in concert.
I mean, it really is, because understanding your identity security posture and detecting and responding to those threats is so important, but it's most critical when these privileged entitlements are involved. And yesterday, Chandra announced this forthcoming SailPoint Privileged Security Posture Management, and Lori, you've been leading this effort all along, so maybe you can talk a little bit about the problems that privilege security posture management. I'm getting it down.
That's a lot. That's a lot to say.
Yeah. Talk about what that's solving for us, please.
PSPM. Let's go. Yeah, we like acronyms. So obviously, privileged entitlements are our most sensitive entitlements in our environment. And we really do want to make sure that we are securing those. But in modern environments, privilege extends beyond your infrastructure. A lot of times when we say PAM, and we look at PAM solutions, they're really focused on admins and infrastructure in the infrastructure layer. But really, the reality is every app has its own privilege layer. There's privileged actions inside business applications, inside SaaS apps, in DevOps environments, and in your AI infrastructure. In fact, most users at some point are a privileged user. We call this, and you heard Chandra talk about it yesterday, but the democratization of privilege. To secure the environment, these privilege entitlements must be first and foremost identified. Sometimes they're hard to find. But organizations have hundreds of thousands, and quite frankly, usually tens of millions is probably a better way of saying it, entitlements in their environment. So deciphering which entitlements are privileged can be very, very difficult, despite the fact of how important it is. So, SailPoint privilege entitlement discovery and classification utilizes the power of AI and ML to automatically identify those privileged entitlements and recommend classification levels. Privilege insights also give us the ability to discover and classify, sorry, that's only half the battle, I should say. We get to discover and classify them, but we really have to get visibility into how they're being used in our environment. So this is what we really call the posture management portion of this. This is where the power of the SailPoint identity graph and PSPM come together. So all of these insights that Ben talked about, outliers, usage, access pathways, that's all being rendered for these privileged accounts. So by gaining a deep understanding of privilege entitlements and usage, preventative controls can be enforced. But least privilege isn't static. It's adaptive. It's not something that just happens once and we leave it. SailPoint has historically applied preventative controls at what we call admin time, meaning user accounts are provisioned before a user can log into an application. These standing privileges, however, can be vulnerable to attack, and we just heard them talking about this in the last session. But it's really those privileged entitlements that are most vulnerable. Modern identity platforms continuously evaluate identity attributes, risk signals, and environmental conditions, and adjust access in real time, reducing the exposure without slowing productivity. Rather than pre-provisioning access and leaving it standing in applications, access is granted just in time, in real time, as we like to say, and only for as long as it's necessary, no longer standing. It is no longer sufficient to simply answer the question, who should have access to what? Now we have to answer who should have access to what, and should they have it right now, based on what's happening in the environment. SailPoint Identity Security Cloud supports time-bound access for privileged entitlements today, but that's just the beginning. We are moving towards real-time access decisions where contextual data is evaluated at time of access. This means authorization decisions are made at admin time, runtime, and continuously while in session. This is what we call continuous governance.
Yeah, and so, last but not least, I want to talk a little bit more about the Identity-Infused Security Operations Center. We heard from MA and Doug at Packard, an iconic American company too, by the way, about all the great things that they're doing there, and I'm not surprised that they're on the leading edge of it. But there's some fascinating things here we're about to show you. So we talked a minute ago about the shared signals framework that enables the communication of events. it's important that the identity context is readily available to security teams, especially during these incident responses. So historically, that's kind of been missing from the Security Operations Center. That SOC analyst has very little insight, typically, into the identity associated with the account, and things like its access permissions, especially privileged access, or access to systems that are outside of the system being breached, which is, of course, where they're going to want to try and go to from a lateral standpoint. Access behaviors, all that stuff. And all this delays the response and the investigation, and it just further makes the organization vulnerable to the attack. But all this is about to change. We've been doing some amazing work with Deloitte. I'd love to invite my good friend Naresh Prasad up here. He's a principal with Deloitte. He's focused on cyber risk services. He's been working with SailPoint for over 20 years. So Naresh, I'd be delighted if you can come up here and tell the folks how we're working together to bridge this identity and SOC world. There he is. I was nervous for a second. He's coming.
He's coming. Hi, Naresh.
Well, first of all, thank you both for working with us to bring this use case to life. This is one of the use cases in our cyber AI blueprint for how the modern cyber organization will function. Quite simply put, there are two main reasons why identity context data is important for Security Operations Center. Number one, analysts are incredibly fatigued. And if we can bring this context data to analysts, it can actually simplify their workload and help them resolve threats faster. Number two, when you look at the data, the attacker can stay on the network for an average of 200 days. If you can bring identity context data to bear, we can detect some of these threats faster. What I want to do next is show a quick demonstration of how we do that by combining Deloitte's digital analyst with SailPoint's Harbor Pilot agent, agent-agent communication. They can detect threats faster, reduce fatigue, and actually simplify the remediation process. Let's play a clip.
Security Operations Centers, or SOCs, are on the front lines of cybersecurity, yet they're often overwhelmed by alerts, each demanding manual identification, analysis, and response. This highly manual process requires these analysts to spend an average of 22 minutes per alert, totaling thousands of hours each month. With a limited number of SOC analysts and outdated process, it's not a matter of if a threat will be missed, but when. Also, the overwhelming volume of alerts makes timely resolution nearly impossible. That's why we developed Deloitte Digital Analyst. Digital Analyst reviews related historical tickets and contextual information. By combining AI-enabled threat analysis with identity context from SailPoint, Digital Analyst can assist SOC teams in efficiently resolving security alerts. When combined with SailPoint Harbor Pilot Agentic AI, Deloitte Digital Analyst can harness identity data to help improve the analysis and triage of security incidents faster, and the agents collaborate to take action when necessary. This can help reduce time to detection, incident backlogs, and analyst fatigue. Let's take a quick look at how Digital Analyst works in practice. Here we have a list of alerts. By clicking on any alert, we can view its details. If the analyst needs deeper insight, they simply press the Analyze button. Now imagine an incident activity that includes richer information from SailPoint, incorporating account data associated with the incident mapped to the attack framework. The information could help you enhance your security incident response and trigger remediation activity to neutralize the threat, improving overall security posture management. That's Deloitte Digital Analyst and SailPoint Harbor Pilot in action, bringing identity and security operations together to improve operation and cost efficiency, reduce risk exposure, and provide differentiated insights to automate heavy lifting, so SOC teams can focus on critical security incidents.
Thank you all. Thanks, Ben and Lori.
Thanks, Naresh.
Thank you. Thank you.
Care.
All right, let's hit this home. You know, we opened this up by saying, hey, we gotta close the gaps in our systems. How do we do that? We need more insights and visibility using O&I. We need to make sure we're protecting our highest privilege accounts and understanding the security posture of those. We also need to make sure that we're contextual and responding in real time, and that we're not leaving standing privileges out there. But I have one more call to action for all of you. I think it's always important to leave with something you need to go do. All of that is great, and the technology gets us closer to where we need to go. But really, it starts with you, the people in this room, the identity practitioners and the security practitioners. You know, I think I've seen organizations where identity is the top threat, and yet the identity team doesn't work with the SOC team at all. We need to bridge that gap. So my challenge to you all is go back, identity practitioners, go meet your SOC teams, and let's start to bring this together and close the gaps. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all. See you.